All right, so if you're new here, we've been doing, or if you haven't been in a while, welcome. I'm Pastor Tanner, and we have been doing a discipleship series since the beginning of September. So the first time we were here, we looked at how Jesus called his followers to follow him. The second time, we looked at how as disciples we need to discern the powers, how they've fallen, how they've been redeemed. The third time we've been here, we looked at how the Great Commission has turned into some very competitive disciples. And we can see that these disciples who Jesus called were not perfect by any means. They had their flaws. And that's why we're here today. We are imperfect beings, and we have a God who loves us very much and wants a relationship with us despite that fact. That's the beauty of the gospel. All right. So discipleship. We're going to continue in John. We're going to be in John 4. We kind of did John 1, 2, and 3 because John has the word disciple the most. But I've used Matthew here and there. So we'll go through John, but we're going to, at times, in the next month or so, take a break from John and go to Matthew. Plot twist. So, being a disciple is about learning. And every single one of us as a disciple, myself included, have a lot to learn about the way of Jesus. And so did Jesus' 12 disciples. Man, did they have a lot to learn. So that's what I'm going to emphasize in the John 4 account. How many of you know, raise your hands, if you've heard of the account where a Samaritan woman encounters Jesus at a well? If that's a familiar, okay. Yeah, so familiar? Okay. So the premise is basically that. There's Jesus and disciples have done a lot of great ministry close to Jesus' hometown. Imagine Jerusalem is down at the bottom of Israel. And then there's Samaria in the middle, and then there's like Judea. So Jesus has done a lot of ministry in Judea. Samaria is in the middle. And for context, Jesus is fully God, fully human, but particularly Jesus' human aspect, he was born into a Jewish family and Jewish culture. And that was very important because God's chosen people for a long time have been the Israelites. And they did nothing in their works to merit that, but they were a nation set apart by God. But God's plan was always to be a witness to all the nations, every tribe, tongue throughout the earth. But it was important, especially for promises that the Messiah, that God's chosen one would be from the line of Israel. Now, who are the Samaritans? The Samaritans, in simplified form, in biblical history, the Israelites rebelled against God, and they made promises with other kings, and the other kings realized that the Israelites were liars, and so they invaded Israel and they destroyed their temple. Two particular empires were the Babylonians and the Assyrians. So they left some Israelites in their land, but then they took some other Israelites with them to exile. Those exiles intermingled with the Babylonians and the Assyrians, and they became Samaritans. So Samaritans, theologically, really only follow the first 5 books of the Old Testament, whereas the Israelites would follow the rest of the Old Testament. So, the Samaritans believed that the Messiah, God's chosen one, would return, but they would worship on the mountain where the 10 Commandments were given to the Israelites. So on that mountain, whereas the Jews thought that the Messiah and chosen one would come to Jerusalem and restore the Jewish people into a higher position. And so we're going to see Jesus kind of turn both of those expectations upside down. But there's a Samaritan woman in Samaria who is tired, thirsty, alone, at the very hot part of the day, by herself, going to a well, and Jesus meets this woman here. But what were the disciples doing? Because these disciples were following Jesus, and this is what I really want to emphasize. So in John 4:8, and we're going to get to this, Jesus wanted his disciples to see what happened, but he knew that his disciples were not prepared yet to really do something about what was happening. So he sent his disciples to go buy food. And then when Jesus sat at this well, the Samaritan woman came, and Jesus and the Samaritan woman had this conversation. And then when the disciples came back from town to buy food, and they saw Jesus talking to the Samaritan woman. That's in John 4, 27, 33. They were surprised to find him talking with a Samaritan woman. Why were they surprised? First of all, it's a Samaritan. Jews and Samaritans do not get along. They're enemies. Next week, we're going to talk about loving our enemies. So strike number 1. Strike number 2, she was a woman. For an adult male to have a private conversation with an adult female in that time, unless they were married, that was hugely taboo. So just for the two of them to chat, not great. And then we're going to find out, but this Samaritan woman, she's had numerous husbands. So long story short, she has a past and a present that is a little bit shameful. So like 3 strikes, these disciples are wondering, why is Jesus having this conversation with this woman? And so they attempt to distract Jesus because they don't think it's a good idea with food. Sir, you must be hungry. Eat. And essentially, the disciples did not understand what Jesus was doing. And this is my main thesis that I want you all to take away. Part of our discipleship involves opening our eyes to what God is doing and to watch and to see what he's doing before acting. Many times as disciples, we might have ideas, and we might prematurely think they're God's ideas, but we're not opening our eyes to seeing what God is doing. And we act on those ideas naively, and we're kind of in a similar spot as the disciples. Jesus knows his disciples have a ton to learn, and we're going to see how flawed, imperfect, brash they are. And Jesus wanted his disciples to see, to watch what's happening, because they won't understand. And so discipleship, a lot of it is simply watching and paying attention. What is God doing? Discipleship is about opening your eyes. And so later in John 4, after Jesus has this conversation with the Samaritan woman, after she believes in Jesus as the Messiah, after she goes to the rest of the village and tells all of her friends about Jesus, Jesus then has a private conversation with his disciples, and he basically says this. "My food," said Jesus, "is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Don't you have a saying, 'It's still 4 months until harvest'? I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest. Even now, the one who reaps draws a wage and harvests a crop for eternal life, so that the sower and the reaper may be glad together. Thus the saying, 'One sows, another reaps' is true. I sent you to reap what you have not worked for. Others have done the hard work, and you have reaped the benefits of their labor.'" He basically tells his disciples, open your eyes. Their eyes are so focused on food that they're missing on what God is doing with the Samaritans right there in front of them. And we as disciples need to open our eyes. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a practical training. You're going to watch a video, and it's going to introduce something called the 5 thresholds. This is some practical training on sometimes when we talk about Jesus or share Jesus or have friends or family members or classmates who don't know Jesus, but we're wondering, where do we start? This is a good tool that opens our eyes to maybe how to approach our friends based off where they're at. So the disciples, they had no idea what was going on, right? Like they couldn't even approach the Samaritan woman and begin a conversation because they had so much preconceptions. But Jesus knew exactly what to say. And as we go through the 5 thresholds, we're going to see that the Samaritan woman actually goes through each of these 5 one by one. Now, in real life, your friends might not go through all the stages in a linear one-by-one way. Sometimes they might go through one stage and back one stage. That's totally okay. But for the purposes of the Samaritan woman, she goes through all these 5 one by one. So we're going to watch this video. I'm going to show you where the woman goes through the 5 stages. And then I'm going to give you some practical tidbits for, in your context, whether it's a school, your homeschooling group, or your families, what practical things can you do based off of what stage your friends are in. So this is basic evangelism training. So the Samaritan woman goes through all 5 of these stages. In the first stage, she's coming to the well for her own needs. She wants to go without the other woman because she doesn't want to talk about her shameful present or past in front of other women or with other people. So she goes by herself. Jesus is there, they meet, they have a conversation, and Jesus boldly says, "Can you give me a drink?" And she says, "You're a Jew, you're asking me a Samaritan. How can you ask me for a drink?" And he boldly says, "If you knew the gift of God, you would ask me for living water." And so they engage with a trusting relationship. The Samaritan woman is quite sassy, and every right. She's suspicious of Jesus, but she trusts him. And he piques her curiosity because he talks about this living water. And the Samaritan woman says, "Are you saying that this like you have water that's better than this well?" And then she talks about this well, about how Jacob, raise your hand if you know Jacob from the Bible in Genesis. So this is Jacob's well. So this is a really sacred well. And she says, "Our forefather Jacob put this well there. Are you saying that whatever water you have is better than this?" And then he says, basically, "Go call your husband and come back." And she says, "I have no husband." And then he's like, "You're right. You've had 5 husbands." So he shows that he knows her life without her revealing that. So he sparked her curiosity. And then she wants him to tell him more. And so Jesus goes on, because then the Samaritan woman says, "Oh, I see that you're a prophet because you know a lot." And so they kind of get into a conversation. The conversation really revolves around the place of worship because she asks him, "You're a prophet, so tell me this. Where should we worship at the end of all things? Should we worship on our mountain or should we worship in Jerusalem?" And this is kind of a trap because this is a debate that the Samaritans and the Jews consistently have. And then Jesus says, "Neither. The true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. And that time is coming." And so he not only engages her curiosity, but then she's open to change because she says, "Well, I'm waiting for the Messiah, and when he comes, I'll follow him." So she's showing an openness to change. And then Jesus kind of has a famous one-liner. He says, "I am the Messiah, I am he." So the Samaritan woman goes from being open to change to then being bewildered and trusting that he really is who he says he is, that he is the Messiah, that he is the chosen one. And then she goes, not only keeps that conversation there, but then she goes and invites the whole village and says, "This man has told me everything about me. Could he be the Messiah?" And so Jesus stays with the Samaritan village, and his disciples just have to stay with them because they're following him. And the whole village believes and follows Jesus as the anointed one, the king, God's son, the chosen one, the Messiah. And so this whole village follows Jesus. These disciples who he told, like Jesus said, "Open your eyes." Man, their eyes had to be open because they watched one woman put her faith in Jesus and they watched a whole village follow Jesus. So he says, you were so, basically he tells them to open their eyes because they're so focused on food or silly things that really don't matter long term. And at the end he says, "My food," said Jesus, "is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Don't you have a saying? It's still 4 months until harvest. I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest. Even now, the one who reaps draws a wage and harvests a crop for eternal life, so that the sower and the reaper may be glad together. Thus the saying, one sows, another reaps, is true. I sent you to reap what you have not worked for. Others have done the hard work, and you have reaped the benefits of their labor." If I were the disciples, I would like to think, wow, that is an incredible miracle. The harvest is ripe. But spoiler alert, the disciples do not get it. Despite Jesus telling them, "Open your eyes," they continue and continue to not get it. And we're going to see practical examples of Jesus being graceful to disciples who just do not open their eyes and do not get what God is doing. So we're going to stop there. And we're going to actually play some songs. Nathan and I are going to play some songs. I'll encourage you as we sing the songs together to open your eyes to what God is doing in your life, to your spheres of influence. And then when we're done finishing the songs, rather than breaking up into small groups, I actually want you to turn to, stay in the room, go into a group of 3, and it doesn't matter who, but just go into a group of 3. Actually, you know what we're going to do? So half of the room stay. Okay, if you're of high school age, so grade 9 to grade 12, you stay here. If you're in junior high age, grade 6 to grade, go to the gym. Find a group of 3, and then just talk about these questions with each other. Okay? So that's going to be what we're going to do. But first, let's worship God through some music.